enjoyed working and going back and forth on email and phone calls with Yuriko, and it's been a real pleasure. And I know Justin and I have enjoyed that, and she's teaching a course this week, which had an online portion, and I think the students are having a great time learning about aesthetics. Yuriko is a philosopher. She is originally from Hokkaido, if I pronounce that correctly.
Hokkaido.
Hokkaido, Japan. And from her conversation that we rode around and we took a ride up to Lolo Pass, or almost to Lolo Pass, and she was saying Hokkaido looked a lot like that. The feeling I got, it was a little bit like Victoria Island, I think. So it must have been a cool and beautiful place to grow up. Yuriko came to the United States in 1975 to do graduate work, but also I think you came earlier in 69 to 70 as an exchange student, and went, at least did her graduate work at the University of Wisconsin, correct?
Yes.
Her work has been primarily on aesthetics, which makes sense since she's been a professor at the Rhode Island School of Design since 1981. 81, yes. And she does things on the aesthetics of Japanese aesthetics and everyday aesthetics. And I will tell you that there is a wonderful article that you can Google online and get from On Everyday Aesthetics, I believe, that Yuriko has written. She's right now completing a book on everyday aesthetics for Oxford University Press. And I'm very happy to introduce you to Yuriko and thank her for being here.
Well, thank you all for coming in the evening for the talk. And I first want to thank Dane and Justin for hosting me for this week. And they have been wonderful hosts, accommodating my finicky dislike of heat. So they've been wonderful. And I also want to thank the Center for Ethics for making the course and this talk happen. So I'm glad to be here. And as Dane mentioned, I've been really, I wish I had more time to explore, but so far I've been very busy with teaching. But the little bit I saw around Missoula, it does remind me of home, so I feel like I'm home. Anyway, and I do apologize for the real low-tech presentation. I have not joined 21st century yet. So, slide projector, which probably some of you have not even seen. It's like a rotary phone or typewriter. And so I do apologize. I just haven't taught myself to do it. So I was not going to try it on you as a guinea pig. So I will be showing slides for the visual part. And the handouts I gave you, that was primarily a note for myself. Like Ned's talk yesterday, he had all these quotes and references up on the screen, which would have been really ideal, but I don't have that. So I decided to make copy for you. So when I make some quotes, then you can follow that along, okay? I'm going to be talking about the aesthetics of Japanese garden, and there's so much to say, but I'm sort of picking a few themes. And all these themes sort of converge around the embodying respect, the respectful attitude, primarily toward nature, but also toward human beings. And I have become much more interested in Japanese aesthetics and its sort of relationship with the moral virtues, like respect, considerateness, or thoughtfulness, care. And I think Japanese garden sort of is one example which sort of encompasses this particular moral virtues. So I tried to sort of tease out some of these things by the various examples. But I'm going to start with something which is going to shock you. Could you put the okay. This is not a Japanese garden. And the students in my class have seen it yesterday. Well, it's a French formal garden from 16th century. And I'm going to show you a bunch of formal gardens. And the reason why I'm doing this to start the talk is it's a kind of personal anecdote. When I started, this is Versailles, the plan. And this is a part of it. And that's part of Versailles. Also Versailles. This is British Blenheim. And this is also Blenheim. And then the final slide, this is contemporary Rhode Island. In my not my backyard, but close to it, between where I live and Newport, Rhode Island. We have this wonderful garden called Green Animals, and it's whoops, sorry, I want to go back. Probably the best example of topiary garden in North America, and so it features all kinds of animals. You see some of them, and a corkscrew and all that stuff. The reason why I showed you this is to relate to the way in which I sort of got interested in Japanese garden. I took a summer course in nature aesthetics. My first, somehow it keeps. My first summer course in graduate school, I took a course in nature aesthetics. And the professor went through the Western sort of nature aesthetic theories and so on, and then started showing those kind of formal gardens. And this shows my ignorance more than anything else. I have never seen anything like that. So to me, it did not look like a garden at all. So I sort of blurted out in class, "That's not a garden." And he said, "Oh, yes, it is." So I thought, whoa, because to me, garden meant what I was used to, which is Japanese garden, which you will see tons of. So it got me kind of interested to do some reading on those formal gardens. And then I got even more sort of surprised because the writing about formal gardens at this time all talked about how those formal gardens represent nature, although nature in capital N. And I thought, how could that be? It's the furthest from what appears to be nature because it's so formal and geometrical, and it's not really a representation of nature. And so that got me interested in doing research on formal gardens and, on Western side. But then it got me also interested in Japanese garden as a contrast. And usually the contrast is made that these things are artificial, unnatural, versus Japanese garden are natural looking. But then I pursued that contrast a little bit further. And then what sort of surprised me more was Japanese garden, which is usually celebrated for appearing natural, is extensive manipulation. Just really fussy manipulation. So how could that be? So that got me sort of into investigating the enforced natural look in Japanese garden. Okay. So, all right. So the story starts with the ancient period in Japan. And all the sort of Japanese aesthetic sensibility goes back to ancient court culture. It's called Heian period. And the date is from 794 to 1184. And that's when Kyoto was the capital. That's where emperor resided, all the aristocrats. And that's where the Japanese sort of aesthetics started flourishing, including garden. And the first treatise book on garden making we have is from 11th century, and I put that title here on the top. It's called Sakuteki, which means essay on garden making, and that was written by an aristocrat. And this is a fairly short document, which essentially is a manual for garden maker, how to make gardens. And it sort of incorporates, although it doesn't specify it, it incorporates the indigenous religion of Japan, which is Shintoism. Excuse me, Shintoism, which essentially recognizes the spirituality of every natural object. Okay, so the idea is to make a garden by respecting, honoring each object. So, but it's not as if that, you therefore sort of take nature and then just represent it as is. It's far from it. So the garden, this is a quote, the long quote on the first side. the garden is supposed to represent nature not as an indiscriminate copy, but as an idealized beauty with selective parts taken from nature. So the quote goes, quote is from this 11th century document. Some person has remarked that the stones placed and the sceneries made by man can never excel the landscape in nature. Nevertheless, traveling through many provinces, I have noted on several occasions that when I was deeply impressed by the beauty of some famous scenic site, I also found some worthless views existing close by. In the case of a man-made landscape garden, since only the attractive and best parts of the places are studied and modeled after, meaningless stones and features are seldom provided along with man's work. So this shows clearly that it's a very selective choice of the nature that you want to represent. And when you do represent nature in the garden, the second quote says, think over the famous places of scenic beauty throughout the land, and by making your own that which appeals to you most, design your garden with the mood of harmony, modeling after the general air of such places. So what that means is that you pick sort of scenic places, and then you sort of have to intuitively figure out the general air or the mood of the place, and then that's what you're supposed to recreate in the garden. But when you do that, another sort of rule is toward the bottom. Successful expression of scenic mood must involve little touch of artificiality. For example, stones at the top of waterfalls should be placed in a casual manner as if they were left there and forgotten. Or a garden stream should be made in some interesting natural manner without the air of artificiality. So the big question is, okay, so how do you create this enforced naturalness? Artificial creation, which is not supposed to look artificial. So that's a big sort of question mark for me, which led me to think about this. And Sakuteki has this two cardinal principles. I will address both, but the first principle that I want to address is koan ni shitagau, which literally means obeying the request. Request of what? Request of the rock. This document particularly talks about rocks. So what that means is that it says, first install one main stone, and then place other stones in necessary numbers in such a way as to satisfy the requesting mood of the main stone. Okay? And one more on the back of the sheet. First, complete the placing of the principal stone having a distinct character, and then proceed to set other stones complying to the requesting mood of the principal stone. And this, obeying the request, complying to the request of the stone, that appears sort of scattered all over this document. So it's a very important principle. And I will show you how this gets translated in the visual way. Sorry. Okay, so this is the typical Heian period garden made for the aristocrat residents. And this is a kind of garden that this author was referring to. And one of the things that I will get to the obeying a request of the stone in a minute. But one thing that you want to notice is that there is a sort of main, house or pavilion, and there's a step down to the garden, and then there's this island, and there's a bridge, but all these bridges do not line up. Okay, so there's no central axis. Okay, because that was another principle of design that I will talk about later. So just keep a note of that. So stone. So when you have do the garden design, making a rock combination arrangement, the first thing you have to do is to figure out what the rock is requesting. What's that sort of innate characteristic of each rock? Does it have the sort of upward thrust, or does it have the horizontal sort of laying down kind of design? And that's the thing that you are supposed to do. So each rock has, this is a languid kind of rock, which should be placed not upright or oblique, but laying flat. This is sprightly kind of rock, and it should be placed like that. And this is a heroic, so it lends itself to, sort of go up. So this would be one example, simple example of the main stone would be the upward thrust. So you place that, and then that sort of requests a sort of complementary stone, which would sort of emphasize each other's the characteristic. So you have the sort of horizontal laying down kind of rocks, and so. Or sometimes if you have a stone which is like that shape, then it sort of lends itself to be made into a bridge. Or sometimes you have, obviously the bridge is not a natural stone, it's humanly cut. But in order to emphasize that geometric quality, you have the upward thrust, irregular shaped rock. So they complement each other. So the arrangement is usually made based upon the complementary. What would sort of, if you put 2 and 2 together, then how best to bring out the inherent characteristic of each stones. So sometimes the stone arrangement gets very, very complicated. This is one example. The best example of the stone arrangement, the whole aesthetic is really based upon the stone arrangement, is this is a real famous, maybe many of you are familiar with this, rock garden in Kyoto called Ryoanji. It is attached to a Zen monastery. And essentially, it's a tennis court size pebbles and 5 groupings of rocks and a little moss. That's it, nothing else. It's almost like a monochrome painting. And this is a view of the right side, the 3 groupings. And so I don't have it with me, but somebody tried to do a diagram, the schematic design. And it's supposed to be such a tight composition that you cannot sort of move one stone without sort of collapsing the whole composition. Let's see, do I have another? Oops, sorry, yeah, just get back. So this, this whole kind of rock arrangement that is based upon this principle of koan nishitaga, obeying the request of each stone. So although, in a way, obviously, it's manipulated, the humans are the one who are arranging it, the way in which it should be arranged, juxtaposed with one another and so on, that is presumably suggested by the rock themselves. So we sort of listen to the rock's request, and then we sort of humor them, so to speak, okay? And the same principle is at work in stepping stones, which are sort of ubiquitous feature of Japanese garden. And as you can see, in a way, it doesn't really lend itself to just, walk through. One of my colleagues said, well, do you do hopscotch there or what? But many times the stepping stone is not so much a utilitarian object, to give you the path to walk on, but rather it is a device to, again, sort of highlight the particular texture, color, shape of each rock, including some rock which is not naturally made. I mean, obviously the rectangle one is some probably, I don't know exactly how that was made, but it's not a natural shape. But so we don't shun the use of those rocks either, but it's juxtaposed against each other so that each characteristic gets sort of highlighted. And so this is a close-up of one stepping stone, one sort of a stepping stone path. So you juxtapose all these rocks of very different shape and texture and color. So you are kind of forced to slow down because of the placement, which is very irregular and in a way hard to walk on. But that's a sort of way in which that we are supposed to, not only walk on it, but also look down and possibly feel the texture through your shoes or sandals. And this is another arrangement of a stepping stone, juxtaposing the different texture and shape. And as I said, there are lots of, in Japanese gardens, there's lots of use of ready-made, so to speak, or appropriation. And so temple foundation stone, which is discarded, or millstone, which has been discarded, those are made use of. And again, it's a juxtaposition of this long rectangular shape against all these little roundish stones. They sort of highlight each other. Sorry about my slides. It's low-tech, but you get the picture. Again, the same idea. And you can see that's also taken from some kind of foundation stone. And this is a very sort of elaborate use of really different kinds of stone. You see the millstones. And this kind of a stepping stone, it's a square geometric shape, but the placement is obviously not regular, orderly. So it meanders. It sort of, in a way, accentuates the squareness, and also it's set against those little pebbles, the other path. So again, there's a sort of contrast or complementary relationship there. Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about Zen Buddhism, which was imported into Japan from China at the end of 12th century into 13th century. And that really made a big sort of splash, so to speak, in Japanese aesthetics. The reason is this. According to Zen Buddhism, which is essentially sort of, not only giving the worldview, but also the teaching you how to reach enlightenment. The way in which you are supposed to reach enlightenment is through experiencing the sort of reality as is. And what that means is that you have to transcend or overcome, or the expression they use is forget our way of interpreting, experiencing, looking at things. So that is, usually we experience things through human categorization. This is a plastic bottle. It's not a bird. That's one kind of classification that we impose upon this reality. But that's a sort of human way of organizing the reality. So in order to reach the enlightenment, what you have to do is to sort of transcend your ego, so to speak. Ego not in the sense of egotistical, but rather the human-centered way of experiencing things, so that you will sort of empty yourself, and then you can sort of directly experience the reality as is. And when you reach that point, you experience what they call Buddha nature, which is really not describable. And the only sort of awkward phrase or word that they use is called immo. It's not a real everyday word. It's a technical Zen word. But the translation usually takes a form such as thisness or thusness or being suchness. That's the only thing you can say if you have to verbalize it. So this enlightened experience really lends itself to artistic expression or aesthetic experience, which can be done without verbal articulation. And so that sort of gave rise to a bunch of Japanese artistic forms, including flower arrangement, brushing painting, calligraphy, tea ceremony, no theater, and much later, haiku. And I mention all these artistic forms because it's not an accident. All the masters of these artistic forms, they were either professional Zen priests or trained in Zen Buddhism. They find that in order to sort of express the Zen worldview, they found the artistic or aesthetic expression to be the most sort of, it will facilitate the expression the most. And of course, that also refers to garden as well. And so already with the Heian period, what we talked about, obeying the request, the notion of sort of trying to respect the individual characteristic, the inherent nature of each object, that is there. And that gets even more support by this notion of Zen Buddhism. One of the documents, which is also well known, is a 15th century treatise, Illustration for Designing Mountain, Water, and Hillside Field Landscape. That's the second quote of the back of the sheet. When it comes to horizontal trees, observe the natural growth pattern of the tree and then prune it to bring out its inherent scenic qualities. Do not prune back the longer of those branches inherent to a tree's natural growth pattern. Prune out only those branches that wander erratically or are long and unkept, so as to achieve a visually harmonious effect. So the idea is that you have to sort of look at the tree and figure out its sort of native characteristic, the way in which it wants to grow. And you are supposed to cut, and eliminate, or sometimes do all kinds of things to make that happen. So there you go. You do all kinds of manipulations in order to have sort of articulate or enhance or clarify the native growth pattern of each tree. So that's the sort of, it's a sort of same idea as obeying the request. And this is sort of has an echo in the art of flower arrangement. And flower arrangement, which is called ikebana, which literally means let flower live or let flower express itself. That's a literal meaning of ikebana, flower arrangement. And it's ironic because you let flower live by initiating its death because you cut it. Right? So you're hastening your death. But anyway, one flower arrangement master sort of summarized the art of flower arrangement by saying, the ultimate aim of floral art is to represent nature in its inmost essence. And that, again, is achieved by cut, or sometimes twisting the stem a little bit. And that's what you're supposed to do. To represent the inmost essence of nature. So going back to garden. So these are the sort of some specific examples of how to eliminate certain branches. Sometimes you retard the growth of certain branches. Supposedly if you mix sulfur and rat dropping, that works as a retardant. So it's, I never tried it, but, or sometimes you put weights on some branch so that it doesn't go up, it sort of stays, do all kinds of things. Or you sort of pluck all the undergrowth to have articulate this, the branch shape. And the idea is really like bonsai. Bonsai is, again, an extremely manipulative, artificial way. You are stunting the growth, but you don't have a preconceived idea about what the shape should be like, but rather you have to have a conversation with a particular tree that you're trying to train, and then sort of let them take the lead, and then you do all kinds of things to help the tree achieve its ideal shape. Well, you can see how it can be very, very loaded with all these concepts. But anyway, so there's a bunch of bonsai. And so when you go to Japanese gardens, and I visited quite a few, invariably you see gardener, working on the trees. And sometimes they, well, obviously they don't use a mechanical, like, bzzz, they don't do that. So like, the clipping shears, or sometimes with bare hand, pine needle at a time. Yeah, really labor intensive. And not only do they sort of pluck leaves or whatever, this is, it has both. You see? And it's not clear, it may not be clear in the slide, but because the drooping cherry blossoms, well, the inner characteristic is like drooping. So in order to maintain that, you have the sort of a frame underneath to make sure that it has that drooping effect. And this one, my RISD students and I always get into the discussion of, is that too noisy? Those, the poles to, yeah, I think it is. But this one is not only the sort of making the ideal thing, but it's such an old cherry trees, and we want to maintain it, so that's part of it, I guess. Or azalea bush lends itself to growing sort of in a roundish way. So in order to, again, accentuate that round mound shape, you sort of, not literally shave, but you have the shaving effect by sort of cutting it. This is another garden of the, which features azalea bushes. This was, when I visited there, it was like rainy season where, it grows too, really fast. So the gardener was, sort of griping, well, it's a little too bushy. So he has to get to work. And this is another garden, and again, my personal slides are kind of dark, but it's an entrance to a Zen garden, and on the left bottom side, that's where you're walking. On the right side, you have azalea bushes, and you have this round, moundish shape. On the other side, you have checkerboard made with pebbles, and so the contrast of strict geometry and the roundish sort of organic shape, it's quite stunning. Now, whether you think that's too artificial, I don't know. And in order to, again, sort of maintain the ideal shape, this is one kind of winter protection for the tree. And that's another, you have a big, this garden happens to be in the Japan seaside, and it's a snow country. You get like sometimes 3 meters, so I don't know, I'm like twice my height of snow. So that means that if you have like a horizontal branch, then it breaks, right? So you have the pole, and then you put the rope, and to sort of make sure that the branch gets sort of, will not break. But it's aesthetically done. So it's not only the sort of utilitarian purpose, but it becomes part of the winter attraction of this particular garden. This is a small scale. Okay, and so that's the sort of the way in which that the respect for the materials are manifested in Japanese garden. The other sort of dimension of respect, I want to talk about the respect for humans, humans who have the who experience things in a temporal sequence. Garden is a spatial entity, but the way in which we experience the garden is not instantaneous. It takes time. You walk around. So it's a sequential sort of a temporal experience. And I think that some device used in Japanese garden sort of caters to and responds to and respectful of that kind of sequential ways in which that our experience is provided. And this goes back to another cardinal principle in Sakuteki, the 11th century document, and that's the last couple of quotes. In spanning the bridge from the island to the shore of the courtyard, do not bring the center line of the bridge to fall in the exact center of the staircase of the main hall. You should instead set the east side post of the bridge in line with the west side pillar supporting the roof of the staircase. The bridge itself should be spanned in an oblique angle. Essentially what it says, remember the first slide I showed you? And I noted that the bridge does not line up, and that's exactly what they're talking about. It cannot line up. The last quote, do not place the Buddhist Trinity stones facing straight toward the main hall of the palace. You should instead place them facing a little off the exact front. The stone in the courtyard should not be placed on the extended center line of the pillar of the building. So the changing the axis, that's sort of a design principle. Now, the way in which it sort of expresses itself, and I chose a little bridge and also stepping stones again. It's very typical when you have the bridge made with either plank or wood or stone that it's usually like two things staggered. So what that means is that you can't just walk straight through. You go to the middle, and then you have to pause, change the direction a little bit, and then continue going, right? That's how you have to go. What that means is that you are sort of forced to slow down. You can't just walk, through to get to the other side. And also, by sort of turning a little bit, you are afforded a slightly different angle from which to experience the garden. And so that gives a sort of multi-perspective view of the garden. It's a very simple device, but in a way, it makes the experience a little bit more interesting. See the bridge sort of zigzag? So it's in a way, just like the stepping stone, which was irregular, so you have to sort of choose how to walk. These are the sort of devices to make your experience a little bit richer. And the stepping stones, sort of meandering. And so as you walk on it, you are going to get different sort of angle from which you view the garden. If you notice the other one too, it's ready-made. I mean, these are millstones that you appropriate. So that's the changing the axis. That's one way of sort of honoring the way in which we humans do have an unfolding experience. Another sort of a device that they use, which I think sort of also responds to stimulating our experience and making it interesting, is sometimes a Western designer called Zen view. That's taken from Christopher Alexander's pattern language that you were talking about. And what that means, the word we use is miegakure, which means now you see it, now you don't. So in order to get to the sort of wonderful scene, you are intentionally blocked. So you can't see what's around the corner. Okay, but then on the right side, that hedge is fairly big, so you don't know what's on the other side. When you get around, then you see this kind of, it's a small scale, but opening. But the most successful use of that miegakure, or the intentionally blocking the view, is one of the major imperial gardens in Kyoto, and it's called Shugakuin. And what that is, this is a big scale garden. It takes about an hour to go around. And you start with the bottom of the mountain, which is actually a working farm, which is used for imperial household. So you go through this working farm, and then you are led to this mountain path, which goes up and up and up. Now, that hedge is like this high. So, I mean, I know I'm short, but even the tall people cannot see. So you are sort of confined to this narrow, stairway. You have absolutely no idea, what's up there. So you sort of go up and huffing and puffing and sweaty and all that stuff. And then you get to the top, and then there's a little tea hut. And so you go there, and then you turn around, and then there's a huge panorama of artificial lake, actually. It's not a natural lake. It's all constructed. That opens up. And that experience is quite dramatic. But you know, if your view has been like cleared from the beginning, you don't get that sort of wow experience. So it's a kind of uncanny device. And so the huge hedge that you are walking through, that's sort of the middle of that green part at the bottom of the slide. So when you go up and then look down, you don't see the path because of this thick growth. And this is going from left to right. It's hard to tell to what extent the mountain starts. The right side is a mountain, but all the rest is constructed, but it blends in, so you don't really can tell. Another thing about this garden is that you see the distant sort of hills? That is part of it. It's called borrowed scenery. It's there, so we are borrowing it, and that becomes part of the garden design. And this is the extreme right of this garden. And this is a winter view. And then you can go down, and then you walk around the lake. And And along the way, you have this kind of mossy mountain path. Unfortunately, it's off limits. But doesn't that look enticing? You feel like, whoa, I want to go and explore. Unfortunately, keep out. But at least it sort of looks inviting, enticing. And so you are going around, and the middle of that hill, you see a little, if you can see, that's the tea hut that we were at, where you get the scenic view. And this is a winter scene of the same garden. And the seasonal change, that is celebrated. Excuse me. So the snow, sometimes the garden does feature snow, and this is the same, the garden with the tree with the support, and it's known for this snowscape. And that lantern has a particularly sort of a flat and a wide top, so that it features snow accumulating. And it is literally has a word saying Yukimi lantern, which the snow viewing lantern. This is another view. You see the support of the tree too? And the reason why I'm showing the winterscape is that one time I made a trip to Japan late autumn and then came back, and I did see some gardens. When I came back, my friend in Rhode Island said, so you mean a garden was open? And that didn't make any sense to me. I said, what do you mean? But her conception of garden is that, well, the season is over, so it's closed. And actually, Museum of Fine Arts in Boston has a very good Japanese garden. It's a small scale, but so one time during winter sort of intensive course, I was doing Japanese aesthetics, and I did a field trip thinking that I would be able to show my students a garden. It was closed. So I said, well, I should have known, but so winter is not an off season. There's no off season for garden in Japan. And this is another example of the snow viewing lantern. That's another tiny, so it's a sand sort of a pebble pattern, and then when you have snow, that's what you get. Just a couple more things about the sort of tidbit. This is bamboo, and then on the right side, there's a water trickling in. And the left bottom side, that is sitting on the stone, and it's also the section of the bamboo. So it's enclosed. So it's like a tube with this part enclosed with the opening on the right side. So the water comes and starts filling and filling and filling and filling, and after a certain point, it flips over, and the water gushes out. And then it flips back on. It's empty now. And then it comes back on. And then it makes this real hollow sound. And that is a sort of a ubiquitous presence in Japanese garden. It's like every 3-4 minutes, you hear this real nice hollow sound. So it's part of the kind of experience ornament right now. But originally, it was meant as a deer scare. And so that you don't get the impression that the Japanese garden design, there was no infighting or no dispute. One dispute had to do with what to do with fallen leaves and flower petals and pine needles and things like that. 3 schools of thought. One is leave it alone, like this, okay? The second school of thought, well, clear it, so that you see the stepping stone. The third school of thought, can you guess what that might be? Make a creative use out of it. One whiff of wind, you're sunk, but things like that. Okay, let's see. If you can change the carousel. Thank you. Yeah, just lift it up and then. Okay, and one more aspect of a Japanese garden, and then I will stop. This has to do with the relationship between outside and inside. And traditional architecture, traditional garden is usually divided or separated by this kind of veranda, which is usually exposed to outside. And in the inclement weather and at night, there is a wooden door which can be slided so that you can enclose a space. But during the daytime, it can be wide open. And so this is the effect you get. And so there's a lot of debate about, well, this veranda, is that inside or outside? And the answer could be neither or both. And there are lots of terminology to describe this. One is called MA, and that is sort of exactly what this kind of thing. It's an in-between space, or pivotal space, or wrapping space. So this sort of, actually, this is a sort of a moon viewing platform which juts out from the veranda to the garden. This is imperial residence, so it's not, one person's house. But so you get the sort of flavor of the sort of airiness in and out. It sort of flows in. So Japan has a tendency to blur the edge of the in and out. So the outside, which is nature, in this case constructed nature because you're looking at garden, and inside the home, the inside space. There is no like a brick wall really sort of separating clearly the distinction, but rather it's sort of flowing in and out. And this is a person's house. Traditional sort of house. It's sort of difficult to find now because everything becomes sort of modernized. But we still have a lot of examples like this. Again, the little garden on the right side, and then the inside with a tatami mat room, and then you have the veranda. And so again, is that in or out? And this is the garden can be viewed from inside or from outside, obviously. So I'll show you a bunch of things from view of the garden from inside. This is like a typical Japanese inn. This is my slide. It was some house in Kyoto, and this I'm shooting this from the street, and you go straight to their garden. I guess it's a safe neighborhood. But the effect is quite stunning. That you can sort of go through and just or you can look at that as like a picture window or a painting. You can sort of make your own frame by closing it or opening wider. So you don't need a painting to decorate your house. Okay. Let me just talk about, I do have a few more slides to show how this respect for the material gets translated into other Japanese objects, but I'm going to hold that off. If anybody want me to show you, I'll do that in question period. But I want to end by sort of making a sort of a reference. I mean, I showed you Japanese garden, and that was my topic, and I talked about the aesthetics and so on. But the purpose is really not simply to introduce, this Japanese objects phenomena to you, certainly that, but also the way in which that the design principle, which I talked about, which I described as a respect for material and respect for human sense experience, how that can have a contemporary application in design, not only Japanese design, but design that we have. And it's interesting that many contemporary designers here in and outside of Japan who are concerned with sustainable design or green design, they refer to their design principle as design with nature. That's the classic statement by Ian McHarg, who is a sort of pioneer of this kind of movement. And some of the phrases that those green designers use are very much reminiscent to me of obeying the request that I talked about. For example, two architects who wrote a book called Ecological Design, Sim van der Ren and Stuart Cohen, they talk about listening to what the land wants to be, and try to design, their architecture, whatever, accordingly. Obviously, it's a metaphorical expression, but it's interesting. And they stress the importance of the attitude of, quote, their quote, use of the word humility. And they claim that they got their inspiration from Taoism, which Taoism is really incorporated into Zen Buddhism, so it's very close. The two ecological artists, I think they're from Spain, who are involved in river restoration project. They talk about the same thing, importance of engaging in a dialogue with the river and developing a grasp of what the river wants to do. Okay, and another designer, Victor Papanak, who wrote a book called Green Imperative, and he stresses not only the ecological issue, but also the design. He himself is a designer and architect, but he sort of chastises his contemporary fellow architects for sort of having the attitude of ego trip and superstardom, and making a sort of artistic statement, irrespective of the users and residents' experience. So he sort of, and there's another architect in Finland who sort of says the same thing. On one hand, they describe the sort of a traditional way of designing a building and so on as arrogance, narcissism, showiness, ego trip, out to make artistic statement, versus what they recommend. And in Victor Papanak's case, he claims that he derived his inspiration from Buddhism. Courtesy, humility, care, thoughtfulness, consideration, respect. So So this, and also Victor Papanak, his book is illustrated amply with Japanese examples and examples from Inuit and Javanese and vernacular architecture. And finally, in terms of a sustainable agriculture that we were talking about today, the Wes Jackson, who is the director of a land institute in Kansas, who is experimenting with doing the sustainable agriculture by mimicking the prairie ecosystem. He and also Wendell Berry asked the same question: what is here? What does nature allow us to do here? And what does nature help us to do here? And so this whole theme, it's again, very metaphorical expression, but the 11th century document, which talked about obeying the request, listening to what the stone wants you to do, again, you know, it has to be interpreted in a certain way, but I think that it's kind of interesting that that kind of attitude was, which is now seriously taken by green designers, sustainable designers, were already sort of practiced. And Tony, are you here? Yeah, you mentioned that. Well, in his Tewa culture, well, they've been doing that for ages. So that's the sort of, so that, you know, the Japanese garden, I don't want, on one hand, I wanted to sort of have an appreciation of this, you know, very Japanese object, but at the same time, I don't want to come up with a sort of real exotic, romantic, you know, appreciation, but how it can have, it can embody some design principle, which is, I think, is usable with a certain interpretation, but it's applicable in today's world as we are, you know, trying to figure out how to build a better world, I guess. So I'm going to stop here. If you want me to, you know, talk about a few other examples of the clever use of materials in other Japanese objects, I will. But I'm going to stop for now.
Thank you, Dr. Sato. I think we'll let Dr. Sato field their own questions if you have a few.
Yeah, sure. Yes.
What's the raking and the doing designs around the rocks or the checkerboard? What does that symbolize?
What does that symbolize? That's a good question. Obviously, the sort of thing around the rock or the rock garden, it looks like the ocean waves, and I think on one level, I think that's what it symbolized. But my personal take is that it's probably better not to have a literal narrative interpretation. The reason why I say that is that when I visited that rock garden, that was quite a long time ago, the abbot, who was abbot at that time, he was very entrepreneurial. And so he had, you're not going to believe this, he installed a loudspeaker on the veranda, and then like every 5 minutes he was like you know, broadcasting his interpretation. And his interpretation was very literal, and his interpretation was, well, in front of you there's a big sea, and then there's a whale, and then there's a island, and there's a turtle. And I think that part of it is that because it's such a popular tourist school excursion destination, you know, I think that he had to sort of, because it's a very severe composition and nothing to hold your attention, especially for little kids, unless you provide some story. And I think that was the intent. But when I heard that, I thought, no, it doesn't quite do it. So it may at one time have had that kind of symbolism, but maybe this is my personal preference, but it's probably better to look at it and interpret that as an abstract composition. And also the the raking itself, you saw in the film, it's a Zen priest, the monks' sort of discipline, because it really requires skill and concentration. So it's part of their the discipline. Zen Buddhism, I mean, anything can lend itself to discipline, including cooking, including cleaning, and all that stuff. And so that sort of a raking, that is also a part of the chore that they participate in. And it's not just a chore to get done with, but rather it's a concentration and then sort of shedding yourself of all kinds of thought and then just concentrating on. Yeah. Another thing, actually, about the rock garden is that I have somebody from California who is an expert on Japanese garden, and then he came to give a talk at my school, and then we were comparing notes, and then he said, "Have you been to Ryoanji, that rock garden, recently?" And I said, "No, not quite a while." And then he said, "I don't know what they're thinking." On the one side of veranda, they installed Coke machine with a red, light, and he said it just destroyed. He was like furious, but again, it sort of lent itself to pleasing school children, and maybe some adults too. So it's really that particular garden. As you can imagine, the best way is to be alone or just with just a few people, quiet. But when I went with my husband, unfortunately, there was tons of school children, running around the veranda, and that's the problem of having something which is so popular, and you want people to experience, but then it's like national park, right? It becomes too popular for its own good. So, but anyway, I don't know what the status is now, but. Yeah, Ned?
In environmental ethics, there's a respecting the good of its own of any living thing, including plants. And there's biocentrism is supposed to aim at respecting each individual living thing. And an objection that is in the literature to that is that there is no sort of essence to particular species, even particular. Especially, or even individuals, but and it's a kind of biological objection, and the idea is that each individual has a range of, think of an individual plant, a range of forms that it will go to depending on environmental conditions. So if you're near the ocean, you'll have, the wind spray or the salt spray will stunt you, or a windy place, and so. And so that's outside of so it's not the genetic nature of the plant to go a certain way. It's sort of, it'll be shaped by the environment, and the species in general just will evidence a whole range of different forms depending on the environment. And so that seems to me to be a possible problem for designing a garden or a particular plant to try to go with its ideal nature or something like that. I see what you're saying. It's interesting point. I think that my take is that, okay, so the pine trees can grow in different ways, right, depending upon where it is. But the gardener deals with this particular pine tree, which has this shape, which has been shaped by salt wind, let's say. Okay, then I think that they are going to go with that. And so when they talk about essence or inherent characteristic, I don't think they are, thinking about the species essence or anything like that. So it's the, I guess it's a combination of the native growth pattern, which is shaped by this, the particular wind, which has been, blowing on this particular pine tree. So that's the essence that they are supposed to be dealing with. I don't know what the implication for that environmental ethic might be. So the same species of tree, but in a different place, a wet place or a dry place or windy or not, they would
presumably you'd have to let it go for a while to see where it was headed or to see what it was doing. And,
Yeah,
and
well-
then it could be very different from that same species someplace else. And both you'd be shaping it into the ideal of what that tree wanted to be.
One thing about Japanese garden making is, in general, when you design the garden and bring in plants, it's not this, but it's pretty, big. And of course, it keeps growing, but it's not like from here and then sort of nursing, and then 10 years later, it gets to this level. So it's pretty much, it's a huge sort of undertaking, so to speak, because you have to bring in a fairly mature kind of tree, which already has, this shape to begin with. And to what extent that's contributed by the tree itself, and to what extent it's contributed by the condition of its own growth, that doesn't seem to be,
You'd want to make sure that where you grew it to 8 feet had the same environmental conditions as where you're going to plant it, because otherwise you're going to do what it wanted in those conditions, but these might be very different, and so then you're really fighting against what it
Yeah, that's a good point.
what
Yeah.
it would want. What the environment might push it to in these conditions.
Yeah.
So
My hunch is that unfortunately, I never had a chance to hang out with the gardeners. But when they, go to the place where, they have all these grown trees, I think that they can probably, figure out that this is really, and I'm making the garden here, and but this particular pine tree, it's not going to do well in this soil because it came from over there. So I'm sure that they have that kind of, probably intuitive sense as to what does well and what doesn't. Yep. The one slide that I had and I lost, which is a shame, is one pine tree, and it's characterized by this branches which are really twisted like this. And I was talking with a gardener, and what he said was periodically he would sort of make a little, a gash, so that this twisting will become even more twisted. Again, it's a real manipulation. You are sort of, hurting the tree in one sense, but at the same time, it's, I'm sure it's done in the right way so that it doesn't let the branch die, but rather it sort of goes even more like that. And unfortunately, I lost that slide, so you have to take my word for it. Yeah.
At the end there, when you were talking about using these principles for ecological design, you said the idea of listening to the plant or the landscape is you have to take it metaphorically and interpret that.
Yeah.
But in its original Shinto context, is it less metaphorical? Is it more literal? Does it make more sense to talk about conversations in that context?
Well, I think it is still, I mean, you are supposed to be having conversation with the rock, but you still have to sort of, in a way, impose your own vocabulary language in order to have the conversation, because rock is mute in literal sense. So, well, let's see. So whether or not the original sort of listening to what the rock has to say, whether that's more literal, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know how to sort of answer that. Yeah. Why do you ask?
Well, I mean, I guess there's other contexts in which, when you think about an inspirited nature, having a conversation is much more realistic than a context in which nature is essentially inert.
I see. Yeah. I don't think that Shintoism would go to, the really sort of having conversation, although it recognizes the spirituality and sacredness. But I don't know whether it goes to sort of attributing the sort of animistic, spirit. I don't think so. And the reason why I kept saying, well, it's kind of metaphorical with the last part, is that in order to figure out what the land wants to do, well, you have to have certain scientific background. You can't just sort of, sit there and then sort of have a commune with land and then figure out what's a sustainable agricultural practices. So, so that's why I think the basic umbrella principle is obeying the nature and sort of respecting what nature has to say. But in order for me to understand what nature has to say so that I can do a sustainable agriculture, you have to have, some scientific knowledge. It may not have to be Western scientific, but some kind of a wisdom which is gained through practice. Yep.
This idea of where is the science in this aesthetic is interesting, because we've been listening to a lot of the progression. I've just been coming to the evenings, but the science in nature, biology, botany, geology, all of our natural sciences, it's a very strong component of restoration. The garden is aesthetic, but it's also it's an aesthetic that has to work scientifically, or it wouldn't continue to exist. It would die. And yet, if you told someone you were just going to listen to the rock, and then this is how this thing should be, particularly in a Western culture, the validity of the aesthetics involved in the science is very weak. And I'm curious as to what the role of science is in this aesthetic. I think a lot of our scientists don't have a lot of confidence when it comes to aesthetics.
Let's see. I think that, well, obviously, for example, going back to Ned's question, whether or not this particular pine tree will do well in this particular soil. The gardener who designs or chooses, this particular pine tree and then plant it right here may not have the sort of, quote, scientific background of botany and so on, as we understand it in Western science. But with the years of practice, it has a sort of intuitive awareness that that's not going to do well. If he was, forced to articulate, then he probably will tell you, well, it's because X, Y, Z. But I think that there is something which is equivalent to scientific knowledge, but it is not the formalized scientific knowledge, but it is maybe handed down throughout generations, that this kind of a tree does well here, but don't plant this one over there. It can be from the knowledge which has been accumulated over the years through trial and error, what works, what doesn't, without chemical analysis and things like that. I don't know whether I answered your question. Maybe not. Yes?
At the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned that Japanese gardens can in some way bring out virtues. What virtues do you think they might be, and how do you think that occurs?
Okay, and respectful attitude, I think that's a virtue. And if my interpretation is right, that Japanese garden sort of embodies a respectful attitude toward nature by listening to rock, and also respectful attitude toward humans who will be experiencing that or using that by responding to the particular way we as sensuous human being, which the experience is a temporal experience, temporal sequence. How that design sort of responds to that. That to me is not only an aesthetic statement, but also it's guided by or motivated by, the virtue of thoughtfulness and care, and in a way, I'm repeating what those designers say, humility. That rather than coming up with a sort of grandiose blueprint and then impose upon it, we're going to sort of let nature take the lead, and we'll help in designing. So more and more, when I think about various Japanese design objects like packaging or cooking, things like that. It's got a rich aesthetic dimension. But and I just wrote a paper on that, and it will be published. But it's called Moral Dimension of Japanese Aesthetics. That many times it reflects that kind of moral virtues. So that's a kind of interesting take, because virtue ethics, that's a sort of alternative to like a duty and things like that. But the formulation of these more feminist-oriented ethics, they deal with actions, or personality, right? And I think that what's interesting about Japanese garden and the other Japanese objects, which I are presenting as a sort of embodiment of moral virtue, is that how artifacts, through their sensual surface, the composition design, can also express virtues. And so I can express my respectful attitude towards you, not only by the way I deal with you, personally, right? I help you out with your homework or, whatever. Okay. But also the way in which I cook something and then serve you without saying a word. And the way in which that I cook, and the way in which I arrange the individual ingredient, and choose the plate. And it sounds like we are very virtuous people. Of course, we're not. We're not. But it's one sort of interesting way in which that virtues can be expressed, not only through my action, but also through the thing that I create or the thing I design. And that's where I think that Japanese aesthetics does have a lot to offer, and particularly given some of the scathing criticism that designer himself is giving to the other fellow designers, that it's expressing arrogance and self-aggrandizement and things of that sort. And so Japanese aesthetic objects sort of give a kind of counterpart to still coming up with a very aesthetically pleasing object and providing aesthetically pleasing experience, and yet it also exudes the attitude of respect, consideration, thoughtfulness, and humility. So that's sort of what I'm working on right now. Yeah.
One of the things that I've always been attracted me in Japanese gardens, and I know you showed some pictures of some very large ones, but most of the ones that we tend to see are smaller.
Yeah.
And yet they encompass mountains, rivers, and oceans, turtles and whales, trees, and all of. I think of like a cottage garden, a British hedgerow cottage garden. It's not the whole world of nature. And I'm wondering how much of that is is that a strong intention to bring that diversity of nature into such a small?
I think so. I think it's also indicative of larger sort of Japanese aesthetic tendency of minimalism. In other words, small scale or minimum element, but it doesn't mean the lack of substance. There's so much in there, but rather than having an exuberant, abundance of things or big things to express these, abundance of things, Japanese sort of tendency is to shrink it and eliminate all kinds of things to the bare bone. And so, for example, the tea bowl, which is a rustic-looking, nondescript, tea bowl used in tea ceremony. Some people claim, and I don't know how that is done, but the whole universe is, compressed into this tea bowl.
So the sort of the tendency has always been to get away from the exuberance and abundance, but give expression to those things, or diversity of things, by the most minimum element. So you, for example, have haiku 575, which is the shortest verse in the world, I think. But it is not, the content through only 575 syllables. It gives rise to so many, rich associations, if you will. So it's not just talking about the frog jumping in the pond. It's something larger than that. Yeah. So that seems to be, the sort of strong Japanese tendency. So you're right that even if you have a very small space, it's not simply a small garden, but it's sort of through that small space it opens up. Yeah. So yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Maybe one more question.
Yeah.
You mentioned there are 3 different schools of thought regarding the leaves, and I was just wondering if there were any instances when a particularly well-done garden was taken over by a different school of thought that changed it. What your opinion was as a result.
That's interesting. No, I don't know. I don't know whether they sort of went through different stages. I'm sure there are precedents like that, but I don't have any, evidence to give to you. Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming. And, thank you, Dr. Seider.